between plants and their symbiotic root fungi. So these fungi are a kingdom of life. It's as broad a category as animals or plants, and most fungi live most of their lives as branching, fusing networks of tubular cells called mycelium. So when you see mushrooms, you're just seeing a fruiting body. It's like looking at the apple on an apple tree. And fungi live their lives totally embedded in their environment. They explore their environment, they branch, they can navigate labyrinths. They're very amazing coordinators of their rambling, shape-shifting selves. And they are thus embedded in very intimate contact with their environment, very intimate relation with their environment. And they're fascinating organisms because they form actual connections between different beings. Ecology is this idea of the relationship, the study of the relationships between organisms and the places they inhabit. And fungi form actual persistent connections between organisms. And so they make literal, they embody this principle of ecology, this relational study, this relational science. And so I found them very helpful gateway organisms into thinking about a relationship, relating more generally in the living world and in the history of the living world. And so when I was doing my research, I was in Panama. I was studying the ways that plants and these symbiotic fungi that live in their roots relate to each other. And this is very ancient association. And plants eat light and carbon dioxide in the process of photosynthesis. And but they're not as nimble as they could be at exploring the soil and foraging in the soil for the nutrients, the minerals they need and the water they need. So very early on in the history of life on land, in fact, right at the beginning of the history of life on land, the algal ancestors of green plants struck up a relationship with fungi. And the deal was more or less the deal that exists today in 90% of plants that still form this relationship, that depend on this relationship. And thus, a relationship that we depend on too, given how much we depend on plants and lie at the base of these food chains that sustain much of life on Earth. And the relationship is that plants will exchange with these fungi energy-containing carbon compounds like sugars that they produce in photosynthesis. And the fungi will swap minerals that they've scavenged from the soil, like phosphorus or nitrogen. And this is a very dynamic and fluid relationship and very astonishing relationship in lots of ways. For example, different plants can become linked together through these fungal networks, and material can pass between plants through these networks. So this is this principle of the wood wide web. Anyway, I was studying these relationships between plants and fungi. I was studying the ways that these tropical forests that I was walking around in were the outgrowth of these symbiotic relationships. These places, these forests which are just bristling with life. There are so many more ways to be a living organism in the tropics than there are in temperate ecosystems. And there's this amazing sense of plenitude. You can almost hear evolution happening, and it's a very amazing place to spend time, amazing places to spend time. And so I was thinking about these forests as outgrowths of these intimate associations. And while I was there was a conference. There was a conference on tropical microbes. And so all these people who came to this conference on tropical microbes, they're all studying different parts of some were studying the bacteria that lives inside leaves, some were studying viruses, some were studying other types of fungi, some were studying the fungi that lived in insects and on insects. And the moment that happened, which really helped deepen and expand my thinking. And it was also just so funny. And we were at this conference, and someone was giving this talk, and they were talking about this type of plant. And this type of plant, we'd known this type of plant before by one of these chemicals it produced in its leaves. It was a diagnostic feature of this type of plant. And so this person said, well, we think of this chemical as a diagnostic feature of this type of plant, but in fact, it turns out that it's produced by the fungi that live in the leaves of this plant. It's not produced by the plant instead at all. And so in that moment, we had to redraw our conception of what this plant was. And then someone next to me was like, actually, I think it's the bacteria that live inside the fungus that lives inside the plant. And I was like, and then the walls wobble and the floor wobbles. And then someone said, like, I think it's the viruses living inside the bacteria, living inside the fungus, living inside the plant. And And things really continued along these lines for 2 days, and we all became just increasingly overwhelmed at the implications of our studies. And many of you will know about the developments in the microbial sciences as regards to human lives and human health, and this idea of the microbiome, this community of microbes that we carry in and on us, more, in fact, microbes than our own cells, without which we wouldn't grow and reproduce and develop and behave as we do. And so we are ecosystems, just like this plant is an ecosystem. Our identities are not so simple as we thought. We're not neatly bounded individuals by any means. We're walking networks of relation, and as were these plants with these different nested relationships. So I mean, this is just such a huge idea, and the more I think about this, the bigger it gets, and it really doesn't stop actually expanding. It's just, you know, if we are ecosystems, then what happens to me? You know, what happens to you? What happens to us? What happens to them? All these terms of relation that we use to govern our human lives, often very dysfunctionally, that we use to arrange our human societies, often very dysfunctionally. These terms become questions rather than self-evident categories. And once this starts to happen, I think all sorts of strange re-evaluations can take place. And when we realize that these terms like autonomy and independence and individuality, that these are humans' terms, that these have arisen for human reasons to serve human purposes, but have very little grounding in biological reality, that in fact, in the living world, you can think of organisms as made up of nested cells, ecosystems and organisms as full of these nested cells. And so for me, it changes the way that I feel, and the way that I walk around in the world, and the way that I treat other organisms. And I found this a really just a helpful way to open up inquiry and to open up my mind and my sensorium, and open up questions. And